Ontario PC leader Doug Ford appears to be on the verge of winning his third term after calling a snap election late last month. The two-term premier said he looked to a refreshed mandate to address the threats posed by U.S. President Donald Trump, including steep tariffs set to take effect next week. I'm Dave Breakenridge, and this is 10-3. Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley joins me to discuss how Trump's threats have affected this campaign, what it's meant for discussion of other major issues in Ontario, and how opposition leaders have fared during this contest. Don't forget you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, Amazon Music. I'd love it if you could leave us a rating, a review, and tell your friends about the show. So, Brian, voters in Ontario go to the polls this week in an election campaign that feels kind of like it's been a little under the radar for a lot of Canadians. I know maybe for people in Ontario even. The election was called kind of hastily by Doug Ford, who said he wanted a fresh mandate to deal with the Trump tariffs. And I know there's big news on the tariffs front today as we're recording this, as Donald Trump has said, oh yeah, no, we're going full steam ahead for March 4th. And so I guess we can use that as a jumping off point. How has that played into the news day in the Ontario election cycle today?
Donald Trump is the gift that keeps on giving to Doug Ford, because he called the election, as you mentioned, on the tariff issue, saying he needed a mandate. Both opposition leaders had been saying, oh, we'll stand side by side with the premier and the prime minister. We'll take a Team Canada approach. And then he called the election. So they can't really come at him except to say, well, he didn't deliver with his trips to Washington, or he's not delivering enough. So Trump saying they're coming full steam ahead. Ford was up in Ottawa on Tuesday morning. Trump had made those comments the afternoon before. And so, Ford's asked right away about it. And he gets to launch into what he's going to do and how this is why they needed the election. And he needs a mandate that will go beyond Trump's term, so that because he keeps saying it doesn't matter whether it's next week or next month or a year from now, there'll be more threats and we need to defend. So he said, if the tariffs are implemented on March 1st or March 4th, every bottle of booze on the shelves of Ontario's liquor store, the LCBO, will come off the shelf, and they will delist the products. They will stop ordering them. Ontario is the largest purchaser of beverage alcohol in the world. They not only supply all of their stores, they supply all the bars and restaurants. So that's a massive amount of buying, and that's going to affect all your bourbon, your Tennessee whiskey like Jack Daniels, Tito's Handmade Vodka is one of the most popular vodkas going right now. That's out of Texas. A lot of California wines. That will get noticed by governors, by by senators, members of the House, and he's hoping that will, get people talking. He's also said that he'll put an export tariff on Ontario electricity, going to Michigan and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, where they supply a lot of electricity to all three states, and that he would start tearing up contracts, whether it's Elon Musk's Starlink contract or the $30 billion of procurement that Ontario does every year. So, we've covered that. What else is there to say? Are you going to turn to a discussion of which party has the best plan to get you a family doctor? They all have plans that sound very similar. This is the only issue that matters right now, and it's really helping Doug Ford and his PC party.
Yeah, I was wondering how, you mentioned off the top that early on in the Trump tariff threat, there was this whole united approach, and even the opposition leaders were kind of, we'll stand astride with the premier in combating these tariffs and coming up with an Ontario strategy as part of a Team Canada strategy. How has this all affected their ability to, specifically Bonnie Crombie and Marit Stiles, to kind of fight Doug Ford on this? I mean, Doug Ford has the benefit of incumbency, and so he's already kind of been front and center in the Team Canada approach, forget just Ontario. How is it shaped up for them during the campaign in their ability to stand apart from the premier on this issue or others?
Well, they're kind of in a shadow, and because of the way things have worked out, Justin Trudeau announcing he'd resign, but not really resigning. And so he's a bit of a lame duck. He's kind of doing his farewell tour, but not really governing at the moment. There's a leadership vacuum at the federal level. And Doug Ford just happens to be the president of the Council of the Federation, the premier's group. And so, middle of the campaign, he gets to lead a delegation of all 13 premiers to Washington, where they met with senior White House staff, where they um, met with governors and senators, and so uh, that's a really big shadow. And Bonnie Crombie can't figure out whether she's fish or fowl. Um, she she's told me directly, she said it in interviews, well, I'm going to be a different kind of liberal. Ontario's Liberal Party under Kathleen Wynne and subsequently has drifted quite far to the left. They're not a centrist party. Dalton McGuinty was premier for 8-9 years. He was very much a centrist, and he won 3 elections in a row with that successful formula. And then the Liberals won one election under Kathleen Wynne, going far to the left, and after that, it's been downhill. And so she's been out there trying to say, well, I'm kind of center right. I'll balance budgets. But then she keeps coming out with policies that sound identical in many ways to the NDP. Merritt Stiles, she struggled to get attention before the election started. She's been struggling to get people to know who she is. In fact, the Leger poll that Canada's most accurate polling firm did for Post Media on the Ontario election, when they asked people their impression of the various leaders, the most common response from Merritt Stiles was, "I don't know enough about her."
We'll be right back. I know you mentioned a little earlier, like with all of the talk about tariffs, this trade war, the threat of annexation, that there's no more important issue. And that is a fair point. And I think a lot of provincial governments across the country are dealing with that right now. But Ontario, like many other provinces, they're dealing with concerns about the economy, concerns about jobs. I know some of that's tied into tariffs. There's concerns about whether you can get a family doctor, and there's concerns about crime. Ultimately, some of those things will be dealt with after the election, but how has that shaped the campaign? The fact that you're not really talking about other things, or even if you are, it's not getting the attention that it normally would in any other provincial election.
Well, it was a day or two before the election was called that Ford revealed his government's promise to and plan to get everyone a family doctor within 4 years. $1.8 billion, a plan devised by Jane Philpott, the former federal Liberal Minister of Health under Justin Trudeau, now at Queen's University. Everyone just sings Dr. Philpott's praises constantly, so nobody wants to say it's a bad plan or it won't work. And so they released that, and we had known it was coming because they made a big deal about hiring her back in the fall. And we were already talking about an early election, well, as far back as May of last year. So she delivers her plan, and then the election's called. Doug Ford, unless asked about it, I don't think has really spoken about healthcare. He's got a pretty good record on healthcare in terms of building new hospitals, expanding or upgrading existing ones. For the first time in decades, Ontario was establishing new seats in medical schools, both in existing schools, but also building 2 brand new medical schools, one in Brampton with Toronto Metropolitan University, what used to be called Ryerson, one with York University that's going to specialize on family doctors. That's, they can't force everyone that graduates to be a family doctor, but that's going to be the specialty of this medical school. Now, those are long-term solutions. But they've done a lot in terms of expanding what you can get from a pharmacist, so you don't have to go see a doctor. In terms of if you got pink eye or a UTI, you can now go to see your pharmacist. If it's a regular thing, yeah, you can go there instead of having to wait several weeks to see a doctor. Um, and my understanding is that's something that you can do in most other provinces already, and we were behind. So He's done a lot, but hallway healthcare, which he campaigned on stopping, hasn't gone away. And the family doctor shortage is still there, despite adding thousands of doctors. Part of the problem is, and nobody's really gotten into a big discussion around this, but part of the problem is our massive population growth over the last couple of years, which is something that falls on the federal government, despite what Immigration Minister Mark Miller may say. You know, what was the term Prime Minister Trudeau used last April? We're bringing in people faster than we can absorb them. In Quebec, this has been a real issue, and it came up in the French leaders' debate for the Liberals on Monday night. But our population growth has put a huge strain on the healthcare system. So since he came into office, the Ford government has increased healthcare by 34%, which is above population and inflation growth, but it hasn't been able to keep up because of the massive population growth going so fast the past 2 years, especially. So he's got a good story to tell, but he hasn't talked about it. The Liberals have tried to make it an issue. Bonnie Crombie has made it her signature on her ads. Their latest ad is a nurse pushing a patient on a gurney out into the parking lot of a hospital and leaving them there. Merritt Stiles has come up with her own plan to get everyone a family doctor. They're all promising that everyone will have a family doctor within 4 years. The NDP and the Liberals are promising to spend more on it. The Liberals are trying to break through with things like we'll make mental health care part of the universal Medicare system. I don't know what the situation is like in every province, but going to see a psychologist or a psychiatrist, it's not always covered under our plan, and they want to change that, and I think that's a good idea. But all of these things are just getting drowned out in the talk of Donald Trump. Trump, Trump, Trump. It was like this at the beginning of his first term, and it's like it again. He sucks up all the oxygen in the room. And so you either ride with that or you push against it. It's easier to ride with it, which is what Ford has been doing in saying he'll be the one to protect Ontario. That's his slogan. And the others have been trying to push against it, which is incredibly hard. So really, the elections become a contest for who will get second place. And while the polling might show that it's the Liberals that will be the official opposition, I'm not sure. There's a world where the NDP, despite getting a smaller portion of the popular vote, becomes the official opposition. And there's a world where Bonnie Crombie takes the party back to official party status, but may not win her own seat because she's got the mother-in-law of one of her fiercest rivals running against her, and that guy is named Patrick Brown, Mayor of Brampton, former Conservative leadership candidate, former Ontario PC leader, who has a political machine that he's putting behind his mother-in-law.
Looking ahead to Thursday night, and I don't necessarily want to look at predictions, although you've talked about a couple possibilities. Doug Ford's PCs went into this election with about 80 seats. I know they won 83 last time. I believe it was 79 seats at dissolution. Do you anticipate an expanded majority for the Ford government? And then based on some of the permutations that you just spoke about with the NDP and the Liberals, where do you see those two party leaders post-election? If Bonnie Crombie wins her seat, but still doesn't take them any further, is she a safe leader? I assume if she loses her seat, she's gone as leader. And what about the NDP leader? If they lose official opposition status, is she gone?
So I'll deal with Merritt Stiles first. The NDP loves losers. And I'm not making that a partisan comment. You just look at the federal level. Thomas Mulcair gave them their second best result ever, and they got rid of him right away. Jagmeet Singh has taken the party lower in 2 elections, and they're hanging on to him for dear life. The former Ontario NDP leader, Andrea Horwath, I think had 3 kicks at the can before they got rid of her. So I expect that Merritt Stiles will, unless she wants to resign, she just became leader. It's coming up on 2 years now. Unless she wants to resign, she'll win her seat, and I think she'll stay on as leader. Crombie, I think if she loses her seat, she resigns that night. If she doesn't, and she takes the party back to official party status, you need 12 seats for that in the Ontario legislature. They won 7 seats in 2018. They won 8 seats in 2022, They've picked up one in a by-election. If they can get 15 to 20 seats, then the party will keep her. Whether as someone who has just turned 65 and doesn't need to work, wants to stick around and be heading to Sudbury and Sault Ste. Marie and Timmins in the middle of winter to try and build up electoral district associations, your riding associations, because the Liberal Party is really a shell of its former self. The infrastructure is not there. If she wants to do that, she can stick around and do it, but she may also just look and say, you know what, it was worth a shot, but I'm going to retire now. I've had a good run, was mayor for a decade, was an MP for years. I was a councillor, had a good run in the private sector. I'm going to step away. There's a lot of options. Doug Ford is a machine who has probably the best job for him, that or Toronto mayor. He would only leave, I think, if he thought he could have some success at the federal level, which I would strongly advise him against it, because they don't fix potholes at the federal level. And if you know anything about Doug Ford, he takes phone calls from people complaining about potholes and then gets them fixed.
Post-election, are you anticipating that it's just, in the event of a Ford win, which is looking extremely likely at this point based on all the polls, that it goes right from election into preparing for next Tuesday? That's the first order of business for Doug Ford, potentially meetings with the Prime Minister and other premiers, and then setting out what Canada's going to do next.
Yeah, I think he would convene his cabinet almost immediately. Perhaps he'd wait till Tuesday to see what the actual actions are. I mean, you never know with Donald Trump. He said on Monday, you're getting tariffs, and Monday night he said, hey, what about that Keystone XL pipeline? We should bring that back. I mean, we don't need any Canadian oil, but we should build that pipeline. And Trump is famous for changing his mind. And in the 2018 tariffs on steel and aluminum, he said one day, we're putting the tariffs in at 2 p.m. tomorrow. In the next morning, he said, oh, no, we're not doing tariffs. It went back and forth. They told the Canadian delegation at 1:30 in the afternoon, you're not getting tariffs. 20 minutes later, he signed it. So who knows what's going to happen? But if Trump brings in the tariffs, Ford, I think, will keep his cabinet pretty much as is, maybe a couple of small shuffles, but the main people will be the same. He'll convene them. They'll start doing what they can without a budget. I would expect a budget by the end of March or shortly thereafter to respond to, whatever Trump puts forward. And I think the legislature will be back fairly quickly, as opposed to taking a long holiday.
All right. Well, I guess we'll see what transpires on Thursday night in Ontario and how the Ford government responds to things going forward. Brian, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
10-3 is produced by Sean Knox. Theme music by Bryce Hall. Thanks to my guest Brian Lilley. More from him at torontosun.com. I'm Dave Breakenridge. Thanks for listening.